Good evening and welcome to another Tech Tuesday stream. My name is Johan and today's a fairly exciting day. We'll be starting our series on how to develop a Flutter app from scratch. We'll be using we'll be actually building our Tech Tuesday news app. And this app after the series will be published to the Play Store, and it is something that you can use afterwards and install. All right. So just a quick note. A few things that we need to get done before we start. Um, if you're planning on following along with the video, you do need Flutter installed on your machine, and then you also need your IDE of choice to be installed. I'm going to use Visual Studio Code, but you should be fine using any other IDE. And then also I have the Flutter extension on my Visual Studio Code. So if there's any shortcuts or anything that you see I'm using that you can't find, you're more than welcome to just leave a comment in the chat, and then I'll get back to you and show you how that works. Speaking of questions, as you know by now, any question you have, just throw them in the chat. I'll try and get to them during the stream. Otherwise, just afterwards, I'll run through and answer as many questions as I can. So yeah, let's get to the fun part. So this is the first episode in our stream. We'll be actually just doing a Flutter project setup, getting our foundations right, and then moving from there. I've found in developing Flutter apps that if you get your initial setup wrong, it's just problems from there. So it's a good thing that you spend some more time setting up your project rather than just winging it as you go. So yeah, just a quick structure of what we'll be doing. Firstly, we'll be generating the Flutter template. We'll not be using the default one, as these of you who've built Flutter apps in past know that you get a default counter app. We'll be using something else. This is a new feature that comes with Flutter 2.5. However, if you do not use this template, all the files and everything is there. You can just adjust your project to match that. Then I'll quickly run the app to show you what's new with the new template app. And then we'll also quickly discuss the file structure of the new app. I'll quickly jump into localization and why we need to set it up in the start and why it's important. Afterwards, we'll just tweak the file structure a bit just to match our needs, and then after that, we'll be setting up our environment config, which is probably the most important part of today's video. So yeah, I think that's everything, and I think we can start. So we're gonna start in the console. As you can see, I'm already in my development folder, having everything neat and organized. So we're gonna start as you start off any other Flutter project with Flutter create. So this is where the first change comes in. Rather than just running this with our project name, we're gonna add a flag for a template and use the skeleton template, and then just add our app's name, which will be Text Tuesday, and then let that run. Okay, so that's done. So we can quickly cd into this file. Right. So our next step would be to add Git to our project. It's extremely important to do this. You want your source control to be active from the very start of your project, so if there's any changes that needs to be made, or you have team members working with you, just to get this out of the way first. For those of you who've worked on higher production level apps or anything like that, you know how important it is to have something to roll back to, or a backup of your code somewhere. So yeah. spelling mistake. Right, so there we go. Gets in it. It's added to our project. So now we've got our entire source control set up. I just need to add all the files to it. So it knows which ones to track. Just adding all files, and then I'll just add an initial commit. So we get our project to be clean and don't have any like change icons or anything on it. Right. So if you are interested in learning a bit more about Git, we do have 2 excellent videos done by my colleague Justin on our channel. It is a must watch, and I recommend each and every one of you to go watch that after the stream. So yeah, that's done with the console. We can now open up our project in Visual Studio Code. Okay, there we go. So with the new template that's generated, we will need to run Flutter pub-get, just so the localization package and so on is added to, is imported into our project. So I'm just going to open up the terminal within Visual Studio Code to have that going, and run Flutter pub-get, just so everything's up to date. And then afterwards, I'm going to start by running the project. I'm just going to click there, debug, select start in Flutter, and there we go. Okay, so while that's building, I'm going to quickly go through the new generated project. So let's start at the top. As you can see within our assets folder, we've got new image sizing options, which is industry standard. In our lib folder, there's been a few changes as well. For those of you who remember, you only get the main file and a normal Flutter project, but now this one's fairly empty. So they've replaced it with the source folder, and within that we have a few subfolders. We have our app as well, which is the material app, which is our entry point into the application. Also, for those of you who've done Flutter before, this is fairly standard. The file structure is new. It's called the feature first file structure. The idea behind it is to have each and every section of your code separate, just for usability and so on. Flutter has generated with a few files. We'll be scrapping those and doing it our own way. Yeah, so other than that, we also get the localization folder, which is something fairly new for Flutter, and within that you get your localization file. So so localization is kind of a strange topic, because most people only want their app to be in one language. So getting people to use localization is always a fairly controversial thing to do. But hopefully after today you will understand why it's important to just have this from the start and then just go from there. So normally what I do first thing when I open up a .arb file, is just at the bottom of Visual Studio Code you can change what the file is supposed to, like the file format. So I'm just going to use JSON because .arb is a type of JSON file. This helps you to get your editor just in place. And I'm going to add a string here, which we will use in the future. I'm going to call it, let's call it running type. It's important that your keys in this key value pair is Dart language type, so no spaces or anything like that. And then we'll just add a string to this. I'm just going to do I am running in, and then so this will make more sense at the end of the stream. Okay, so why use localization? Firstly, it's a great idea just to keep all your text-based all your strings in one place. If you can imagine a situation where you need to change one word in an app. Let's, for instance, say you have an app that has bookings in it, and they want to change the bookings to purchases. It's literally just on one spot where you change it. Also, there's no string duplication. So you type out, for instance, I'm running. Normally you would add that 3, 4, 5 times throughout your app. Now you can just reference this and only have it typed out once. Another important thing is if you build the app, you've got the text throughout the app, and your client, or you decide that you need to now publish your app in another country that has another language. Just imagine the amount of effort it takes to go through your entire app and change the strings throughout. Whereas with localization, it's simple. It's just one new file, and you just keep everything as is. And there you go. So it's just only one file change. So yeah, that's the reason why I always prefer having a localization file within my projects. So yeah, I see the app's actually up and running now. So I can just show you the new template. So it generates with a list view now. Oh no, it does generate with a new list now rather than that counter button. If you click on the item, it takes you to the item details page. So they have set up routing for us, and also they have set up theming for us as well. So we can switch between light mode and dark mode, or the system default. The only unfortunate thing is that we will have to delete all of their hard work to start our project. So yeah, let's do that. And with that sad news, I think we should also just start by adding our file structure and explaining a bit more as to why we use that. Yeah, okay, so I've deleted the sample feature. I normally, when setting up a project, keep the sample feature folder there, just so if there's a new someone joining the project, they immediately know what's expected of their file structure. It's also extremely easy just to copy this and paste it in with a new name and use it that way. So it does save a bit of time. So just to quickly explain what a feature is, it does cause confusion and you don't always understand, but a feature would be something that that's like a separate component or item within your app, and that should contain all its related functionality within that folder structure. For instance, if you build a login screen, you would have your login in there, you'd have the API calls in there, and also all like the buttons and text inputs all compressed within this folder structure, and it keeps it separate from the rest of your files as well. I mean, imagine you have a project with 70 pages, and each of them has about 4 widgets separate on their own files. It could get quite messy finding your way around that, but with this, okay, login, all the login related items is in there. It's a good idea to keep it like this. For instance, if you've done this app now and 2-3 weeks later you've got a similar app and you want to really use your login screen, it's a simple, you just copy the file over to your new project and fix the imports, and then you should be good to go. Okay, so let's keep our sample feature and then just add the files that we will need. So we'll be splitting up our files within this into a couple of folders. The first one would be view or views. So a view is it doesn't necessarily need to be view. It could be screen or page. I just prefer view because it is something that you view on the screen. But it's pretty much your first input, your highest level widget in Flutter would be your view. It's also the thing that you would navigate to. For instance, using my login page example, your view will be your top level. You would navigate to login view. Right, so next we'll add our widgets. Again, everything in Flutter is widgets. However, we separate these two by having view as your entry point, and widgets is everything else. For instance, your button would go into widgets, your text for input go into widgets, your loading animations, that's a widget. Just to keep that separate, so you know if you're looking for a page and you want to make changes on that page, you go to views. If you want to make changes to your button, you would go to widgets. Next, we'll be adding our block folder. That's a file. That's not what I want. So we'll be using the block structure in our app. We will not, however, be using the block package. We have our own spin on that, which is a bit more custom way of using it, which is easier to implement and it's much easier to understand as well. We have a video on our channel if you want to prepare for that. It's called Flutter State Management. That's a basic example of what we'll be using the blocks for. So it's a good idea to go and watch that and just have a basic knowledge of what to expect in the future. But we will be covering that again in this series. Right, and then lastly we have a repos folder. So this is for repositories. This is where you save all the files that you use to connect to anything outside of your views or display purpose stuff. For instance, this is where you would actually call your API or your database and have it return the model that you would use to build your display from. So that's pretty much what this is for. So just for saving time for a bit later, I'm just going to have a sample view here. So this is what you would do to create a sample page. And then within that, I'm just going to import a material widgets and also just create a stateful widget so we have something to display. I'm going to call it sample view, and then it should just build a scaffold for now. I'm going to use this to demonstrate the environment that we'll be setting up at almost the end of the video. So this is just for future reference. And then I will just be the files that will be deleted, I'll remove from the import. And then at the bottom here, they've already generated routing. We will not be using it now. That would be a topic for our next video. But for now, we're just going to set our apps home to be this sample view, so we have something to display. Alright, so if I refresh, it should do nothing. Okay. Let's just restart the app and see if that fixes the issue. Doesn't seem like it. Okay. Yeah, we'll come back to that. Alright, okay, there we go, it's fixed. So yeah, that's our sample feature folder. We have our settings. We will use this in other videos, but we're going to split that up as we use them. So the next thing we're going to look at is we're going to move out of our source folder and add a new high-level folder for our core. So within our core is going to be everything that is not related to any views or displays or something on the app. This is going to be the core functionality or back end of our app. It's going to be in there. And this is just to keep it separate. So if you know you need anything view related, you go to source. If you need anything backend related, you're going to go to core. So the first thing we're going to add is we're going to add a new folder and call it network. So this is going to be where all our API related stuff is going to go in. If you're not planning on using an API, you can just change it to either be database or whatever you plan on using as your data source for your app. You can also add network and database, but for this app we'll only use network. So nextly we'll add utils. This is a folder for all our utilities within the app. Stuff like our config file will go in there. Also, we'll most probably add our validators. So if you have a class that contains all your validators, that will go in there as well. Next, we'll add a folder called enums. This is fairly self-explanatory. It's for where we'll store all our enums. Then lastly, we'll have one called models, which is where we'll add all our models. Oh yeah, and I forgot we also need one for services. So in our folder structure, services would be something that's not considered a block or doesn't necessarily have a stream connected to it. So for instance, this would be something like a logout service, where you have something that you can call throughout your app that logs you out of your app. That's something we can throw in there. And then lastly, our localization folder does not really fit in our source folder anymore. So we're going to move that out into core, which is a more fitting place for it to be. Just an important note, and it's something I always forget to do, and it has happened a few times where I actually set up a project and this has not been changed, and then the project doesn't want to build. So in your main directory, there's a file called L10N. So within that, it's just a reference for your Flutter to know where your localization folder is. So you're just going to change this from lib source to lib core, and that's it. Just save that. Right, so that's our basic project structure. Just the last things we need to add now is within our assets, we just need to add a folder called config. This is where we will be storing our config files for the app. Okay, yeah, I think that's it for the folder structure. If you have any questions so far, feel welcome just to pop it into the chat for now. And also for our viewers from the future that would be watching, we will not be watching the stream or the actual video. You're more than welcome just to comment your questions. We will get to them. If we can't help you, we will point you at least in the right direction from there. All right, so now to some more fun stuff where we'll be setting up our config file for our app. So within our assets config folder, we're just going to add 3 files. So the first one's going to be config.json, and within this we're going to need 2 properties now. The first one is going to be environment. Just have to make sure I'm spelling that correctly, and we're going to assign it a value of D. And then after it, we're going to have an API URL, and we're going to not assign it a value that we will use now. That's for the second episode where we'll actually be connecting our API. For now, let's just use a default value of local for this guy. All right, so you might be asking why D? What does that mean? So in normal situations, when developing an app, it's a good idea to have your environments separate. So an environment would be just like a way of running your app, like a cage, and this is where you put your app in. So we'll be setting up 3. We'll have development, which would be D. We're gonna have staging, which should be S, and then P for production. So the difference between them is D would be like if we're testing locally, we've got the app like we have it here running on a local machine. We also have our API running on our local machine, and that's how we connect with it. So it's our development environment. Staging would be we have our API on a server, like that looks exactly and acts exactly as production, but again, it's a testing environment, so we can make changes and do updates and change stuff there. and then production would be our client-facing side, where we do not test and we should technically not have access to. And yeah, that's just to keep everything separate. I mean, imagine if you just have one API call API, and you do tests and you make orders and stuff on this API, and it's live, and you actually mess with client data. So yeah, that's why environments are extremely important. So yeah, then we've created our config.json. We still need to create two more files. The first or the second one should be our staging config. I call it staging config.json. So within this one, we don't need to set a environment again. That's what the first folder is for. The first file is for. I'll just create the API URL within this one. So this will connect to your staging API, and this is also where you would specify that. So I'm just going to call it local again. We can even make it /SDAG, so we know it's the staging API. Something cool we can do as well within our config folders is add emails and passwords or any other setting that should be environment related. So I'm going to add an email key here and also give it the value of email. And I'm also going to add a password here and give it the value of let's say password. So the idea behind having your email and password in here is in the situations where you have a login screen and you need to test that and constantly log in, constantly test that. You can use this to autofill those fields. So the moment you're either on staging or development mode, your email and passwords for those APIs should be different and should be autofilled within those fields. So it just saves you a bit of time, so you don't need to type it in each and every second time. So I'm just going to copy this because this would be the exact same thing we're going to use for our next file, which is devconfig dot. No, wait, this is supposed to be JSON. Never mind. Rename to JSON. There we go. Right, devconfig.json, and I'm going to paste this in, and then just change for our demonstration a bit later. I'll just swap that out for dev, and then I'll just add dev email and dev password. Yeah, just so you can see there is a difference. All right, so that's our config files. And also, as always, we just need to, in our pubspec.yaml file, we just need to add that into our assets. Change that to config, and add all our config files here. And then just run pub.get to get our files imported. Alright, so now we should have access to our files within our dot program. And I think it's a good idea to actually start implementing our config. Yeah, so this would give us, we can actually add into our utils file now our first actual file and call it config dot. So this is where we will actually be reading our files and using the information we've just added into those three files at the top. We're going to call it, just create a class, call it config. Within this, it's a good idea to actually have a reference to your file, just as a variable at the very top of your at the very top of your class. Our functions that we're going to be using in this class will be static, so we're going to start off creating just a bunch of static variables. So let's just start with let's just static. It's going to be const because we're going to give it a value and then just keep it like that. static const, it's going to be a string, and it should be a private path. So those of you who've not used Dart in the past, to actually create a private variable or a private function, you just add an underscore in front, and it's automatically a private. Right, so we just need to add our path, which is asset/config. That's just where our config files are. Next, we need to actually find a way of importing our files and creating a variable that just references it throughout our class. So we'll call it we'll use static again. Static. This time we'll create a late. So late is something fairly new in Dart. The idea behind it is to use it exactly the same as final. However, the property is assigned after build. So it gets assigned a bit later and only assigned once from there on. We'll add API URL as the actual variable, but not give it a value now. It's important also that your API URL should not be a nullable string. We don't want any null values in there. We will assign it a default value if it is null within our config files as well. So then we'll add another one, call it static late, and this one is for our private environment, which is one of the hardest words to spell. Right, environment. This should also be a string, and it should also not be nullable. We will be assigning a default value to that as well. Next, we will add those two extra properties we added. Should be static also late, because we're not going to assign a value now. String. This should be nullable because you can pass null email through. And it should be the same for password, which I'm going to cheat a bit and just copy and paste. Right, so I think for our starting variables this is fine. We can use it just as is, but now we need to actually set up the way of actually loading the files in and getting access to this throughout our application. So we need to create a function called with the name. We'll make it a static function. Static. It should be a future because we're gonna have awaits in it, but it should not return anything. So it should be a future void. We'll call it init because we're gonna initiate the file. We'll add a sync because we will have awaits, and that should be it. So the first thing we want to do in this function is we actually want to grab those files from the assets folder and load them into our project. So how you would do that in Dart is let's just create a variable that will store those data. We'll call it config file. Config file. Then we'll use you need to await this, and it's called root bundle. It's something that's built into the Dart language, so you can use it without needing to like use any packages. We will then use within root bundle there is a load string that we want to use, and then we need to pass the actual file name in here. Luckily we made it for ourselves easy, so we can just call our path here and then just reference which one of those three files we want to load first. So because the first thing we want to do is everything in this file is going to be environment related, we're going to load the file that has our environment configuration in first, which is config.json. Right, so there we go. That's our, now we have access to the file. Everything is stored there in string form, but it is JSON files, so we want to convert that to JSON. So I'm going to create another variable called final JSON, and then within this we will actually use JSON decode, which is a part of the actual .convert package that is part of the Dart language. We'll just add like JSON decode, and then we'll add the config file as the actual string that we want converted into JSON. So yeah, that's that for now. We can also, what we can do is we can use this environment variable and assign the actual environment that we've gotten from it. So the one we've set in this actual in this file over here. So when you want to get this key, and oh no, that's not what we want. Right, so I want to get this key from the JSON and assign whatever value we have there to this. Now it's important to note that this might be null, and we've set our environment to not ever be null. It's not a nullable file. So in Dart you can use double question marks for a if null assign way of doing things. So I'm just going to assign for now a default as D. So if there's no file, so if there's no like environment set within this file, we're just going to default to development. We don't want to make like risk any staging or production changes if there's no value in there. So next we actually need to do a few things. We can't, we can actually, but we don't want any string comparisons in our app. So we don't want to have to look through our app and say if environment file equals D. So the best way of working around this is actually creating an enum and call it environment. So I'm just going to create an I think I still might have it in my club. Yes, environment enum file. So this is our first file within our enums folder. Create an enum, call it, let's just paste that again, we're cheating a bit today, environment, and then just give it the free values we'll be using. So firstly we'll have development, we'll then have staging, and we'll lastly have production. Right, so that's our 3 environment variables that we will use. So again, based on your situation, this might be much more or this should be much less, preferably never less than 2. If it is, then you might be doing something completely wrong. Alright, so switching back, we need to find a way to actually get this into our enum form now. We can't use, like I said, we don't want to use the string the whole time. So I think it's a good idea to actually create a static function at the bottom. It needs to be static because we're actually going to reference it in that. If I could type, okay, so it's going to be a static function. It's going to return this environment enum that we just created, and we're going to call it, let's say, string to env enum. Let's just call it string to environment. Right, and then we're going to have to pass it a string as a parameter. And we'll call that env. You know, we actually don't even need to pass it anything. We can just remove this, keep it as is, and just use that variable we've assigned at the top there. Right, so first thing we need to do is create a switch. We're going to switch between each and every possible option that could be and assign a variable to it. So firstly, we're going to use environment, which is our switch. We're going to set it to lowercase, just so if there's a capital D or capital S that came through, we can still use it and it doesn't like default to something we don't want to use. So So then, so let's use the first one, which is case. So if we get back D, we want to actually return environment dot development. So this is what this is supposed to be. So whenever we call string to environment, if that is D, we'll just return that. So fairly straightforward. Speed up time, I'm just going to copy and paste this 3 times. Only have 3. Again, depending on what your needs are, it might be more, it might be 1 less, not much more, I hope. And then because it's a string, we just need a default value to return, because it might be something else. They could be a case, because strings can be used as something else. So you can, for instance, pass in the letter F there, and we just want to have the ability to actually handle those situations as well. So if it's nothing at the top, we want to return development. Copy that and paste that in there. So yeah, I'm going to format my document. I think if I save it should do that. Yes. Right. So just a recap, we have this function that we call, if it checks what's the environment currently. We can, if it's nothing, if it's D, you get development. If it's S, I almost screwed up there, it should be staging. If it's B, it should go to production. If it's anything else, it should be development. Right. So now we can actually use this to create a public getter, something we can use in our app. Let's, for instance, we're busy with something and we just want to check what environment we are in. We don't necessarily want to go this entire route just to check our environment. We can create a static getter that we can use for this. Static, which should return environment. We can copy this as well. Should be static environment get environment. Let's just fix this. I'm getting a bit lazy now. So yeah, this is our getter, and what it should return is string to environment. There we go. So now each and every time we call config.environment, it should return whatever we've specified in here. Alright, so now we can actually use this within our init. We can create another switch here, and its parameters should be environment. We can use the getter we've created up here. So actually, VS Code does suggest that it could autofill those for us, which is extremely nice for people like me who are very lazy. The only downside is it doesn't seem to add the curly brackets. And then I've accidentally deleted one there as well. Right, so I'm just going to paste that back in, and there we go. So now it automatically detected that the environment only has 3 options. So in this case, we do not need a default value. So yeah, now we need a way to figure out or to assign the values in our development file and our staging file to these ones at the top here. Again, we do not necessarily want to duplicate it. I mean, we can do the following and say email equals whatever, but we do not want to do that 3 times. It's a waste of time, and we should try and not duplicate code. Alright, so we're going to create a function for that. We're going to do it static. Again, it should be void. We don't want to return anything out of it. It should just handle our request. We'll call it assign variables. And for this case, we're going to actually pass it a parameter called file. So this is the actual file we want to use to assign variables to. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to have a final env content or env environment config. We can change it to config And again, we want to load the file like this. We're going to say await root bundle load string. Just going to copy that, save some time. But now we actually want to use the specific file we've created at the top there. So I'm going to say the parameter that we use here is file. Oh yeah, and I forgot to add a sync here because that needs to be awaited, and also this is going to be a future void. Alright, so there we go. We've got our sync, we've got our await, and we're assigning it to this variable right here. So next we'll use a final env JSON. We'll decode this value over here. So let's say JSON decode, paste that in, and now we have it in JSON form. And now we actually finally get to assign the variables. So firstly we'll have email, which is set at the top there. We'll assign it env JSON, and we're looking for, within this we should be looking for email. Now just a reminder, within this situation that we have here, it's important that you have the same values in your staging and development, because I mean, if there's no email within this, it's just going to make that null. So if you're expecting a value in both, just remember to add them in both. It has happened in the past where you actually forget to assign to add it in both where it is required. So yeah, then we're just going to quickly add password. Should be env JSON password, and then lastly we want to assign our API URL and call that env JSON and call it API underscore URL. All right. So yeah, that's the three items we want to use, and then we have in our dev files, and we can actually use this search statement we have at the top to assign those now. So for development, we're gonna just call our private function assign variables and pass it the actual file name. So we're gonna create a string. We've luckily already done half the work at the top there. Called path, and then just add the specific file that we want to use. So this is going to be for development. We're going to have to use dev underscore config dot json. Right. Next, we can just copy this and paste it into staging, where we will just change this to staging underscore config dot json. But now for production, we've not given it an email and password, so we can theoretically just reuse that function, but we can literally we've already loaded in the file there, so we can just call API URL equals we'll use JSON, and the parameter should be API underscore URL. Yeah, that's all we need there. And yeah, this is pretty much all we'll need in our init function. We can add probably one more getter just to help us. We can even get some of these items as well. So let's do that just for future reference. Just having it as a getter rather than a public variable is just better practice, and it does save you sometimes because you can assign a default value to a null value in a getter. Yeah, so let's just call static. Do we want to call a string because we're going to get the email and password. We're going to say get email, and this should return our private email variable. However, dot does complain because email is nullable and we're not expecting a null value. So again, just assign it a default value of an empty string. we can probably cheat and copy this down for our 3 times for our password and our API URL. So let's just call password, and then just use our private variable for password, and then lastly API URL. Our API URL is not nullable, so we'll just use API URL for that. A good thing we can actually do here is if we have an API version, you can put it in your environment variable. For now, let's just, as an example, wrap that in a string, do it there. So what you would normally do is just add slash API version, but for now we're just going to use v1 as our API version as an example. So yeah, that's some of the getters we will need. Another one I like adding is to actually have a static pool at the top, just for a quick reference to what environment you are in. So you don't need to run just all over the place have if environment equals. You can just have static pool is development, and then this should just check if this environment getter of ours equals environment dot development. So all this does is just checks if our environment is, I forgot to get, yeah, just checks if the current environment is development. So yeah, this is pretty much all you'll need for your config file. I think we still might have a few minutes left that we can actually use this in an app. So I'm just going to refresh this and then see if we can actually pull that data and show it on a display here. So let's just back to the sample view we've created. Within this we can create a body. We'll just use a center because we just want to center some content. We'll have a child with text, should be a text widget, and then this value is actually something that we can use our localization for. So I'm just going to copy and paste just so we save some time on that. We will actually be using a lot of localization in the future, so we'll get a proper explanation of how everything works when we get to that part of the app. This is purely for demonstration. So how you would call localization is just need to get that import. It should be Flutter gen localizer, these two. Right, so just copying the imports for now. Alright. Alright, so just have the localization here. We're going to reference because it automatically generates. We should have a running in here. We don't. Alright, I'm just going to for now just leave app title. Let's see if I can actually get that in this way. It could be that it's not been added yet. Running type. Alright. Alright, it does pick it up. Okay, cool. So you can actually close that, have that there. Then outside of this, we can actually now call, use another one of these, call config dot environment. So you want to actually see what environment we're running. Yeah, and now it should actually display what environment we are running in. Just before I forget, actually within your main we need to actually call that initiation function we've just created, just to make sure that we actually load up the class and have access to it across the app. So the first thing we're going to do is going to await config.init. I think I might be missing an import. Quick fix, import that, and that should be fine. Right, so now the first thing that happens as soon as main loads, which is the first entry point in the app, it should load our config and it should assign all those variables that we've created, and then we should, in theory, have our environment set up there and displayed there. So now, fingers crossed, you know how things goes. Let's just see, did that display anything? Doesn't seem like it. It's not even displaying the text file. Let's just stop this and then just rerun it. See if maybe that's the issue. Yeah, while we're waiting for a bell, I'll quickly run through and see if there's any questions. Doesn't seem like there is anything. But yeah, if there is anything that you want to view or know about, just pop it in the questions. I'll give like a 5-minute, 10 minutes afterwards just to see if there's anything that I maybe can help with. Oh no, I just need to wait for this to build. Let me just double check while we're at it, just to make 100% sure everything is loaded up and built correctly. That should be fine. We did add it in here. That should be fine. And then these look fairly correct. Alright, so yeah, so now it's just waiting for our build time. Like 100% sure we are on sample view within our app. Our app does route to sample view. Now it should be fine. I think it might have been because I commented out that C. Yeah, now I just need to wait. That's still no question. Oh well, this is live. But yeah, I don't know if you want to guys want to wait for this to finish building, or is there any questions or anything? Oh wait, we've got something's happening. Fingers crossed. Doesn't seem to be working. Something's wrong. I don't know what. Okay, I actually have a question. So Ryan is asking for localization. Do we have to specify all text in different languages in the localization folder? So no, we don't. So if you just want to develop in English, you should just add your English language. If you want to add, let's say for instance Spanish, the package does not automatically convert your text to Spanish and so on. So you would need to have a duplicate of this file, saying that where it's saying a running type, it would say whatever the Spanish version is of that. The package is set up in such a way that it does default back. So for instance, if you have all your string variables within it, but you forgot to add running type, it will then just display I am running within that. Also, a good thing to note is that it does auto align. So some languages is written from right to left, whereas English is written from left to right. It does account for that as well, and it does use your actual phone's localization and not the area that you are in. So if you decide to switch your phone to another language, it does include the app as well. So it does that automatically as well. I've got no idea why this is not actually displaying something. It should in theory display that. As you can see, it is pulling through. I don't know why this is not. Let's quickly see if we can actually figure something out here. I don't know. I don't know if you're actually displaying the right thing. But yeah, no, I think you guys get the idea. I don't think we should waste too much time on actually trying to debug why some text is not displaying. But yeah, I think that's the end of the stream. I'll give a, I'll, oh, okay, Rana's actually given us an actual pointer here. He says I should change the text to black. Oh, yeah, of course, because I think the last thing I actually used was a light theme or dark theme. So I'm just gonna add textile. Okay, I hope this doesn't seem like it. No, it doesn't display. Okay, let's see if that actually doesn't update. I don't know why it's not. What the hell? Okay, no, I think we've broken. Alright, but yeah, I think we should end there. We can post an example afterwards. I'll link. Well, anyone's gonna put this on a GitHub repo. You can download the code and play around a bit with it if you want. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I hope you're excited for the rest of the series. I think this is going to be actually super cool. We're planning on actually covering everything, having maybe a few sneaky animations built in. But yeah, thank you so much. And please like the video if you don't mind. But anyways, I hope you guys have a good evening. Cheers.